I wondered if you could tell us in person, sir, why you feel that his testimony vindicated you when it's really boils down to his word against your word. And if you could also tell us, sir, do tapes exist of your conversations with him?
Well, I'll tell you about that maybe sometime in the very near future. But in the meantime, no collusion, no obstruction. He's a leaker.
I don't recall it.
He's a leaker.
I don't recall
Rebuilding
it.
America together.
He's a leaker.
This is the Jeff Santos Show.
I don't recall it.
I know I was fired because of something about the way I was conducting the Russia investigation was in some way putting pressure on him, in some way irritating him, and he decided to fire me because of that. I was honestly concerned that he might lie about the nature of our meeting. I was so...
Oh, James Comey.
That I
Oh,
took it in.
Donald Trump.
I don't recall it. I don't recall it.
That means
I don't recall it.
this was put together by our great friend, great journalist, Democracy Watch News. We get some announcement on that. And, of course, Capitol Hill Times, great musician in himself. That's why we put this great montage together. Mark Taylor-Canfield joins us. Mark, great to have you back on. Happy Sunday, sir. How are you?
Hey, Jeff, can you hear me?
I can indeed. Can you hear me?
Okay. Yeah, sounds good. Well, thank you for playing Total Lack of Recall. That is my piece, and you can check that out at YouTube if you want to see the whole video. There's a video that goes with it, too, which is just, samples of the testimony that Comey gave before the Congressional Senate Intelligence Committee, and also a statement by Trump where he was confronted by the media about his statements about James Comey. So that was a lot of fun. I just wanted to let everybody know that first of all, it's great talking to someone I consider to be the best progressive talk show host in the country. So it's always a pleasure being on the air with you, Jeff. And everybody should be listening to this program. Yeah, whoever is not listening, you don't know what's up. Let me tell you that. By the way, it's been a really cold, wet spring in Seattle, and I actually got to see the sun for maybe 5 minutes today, so maybe I don't have to take quite so many vitamin D supplements. But at least it's not snowing like it is in parts of Wisconsin. I mean, my gosh, like we had rain that were the proverbial cats and dogs yesterday, where literally all the storm drains fill up and all the streets in Seattle become rivers. And unless you have, knee-high boots, you're going to get wet. There's no way around it. But at least we don't have, the blizzard conditions that's going on. I've been listening to the reports on WRRD up there in Milwaukie, and just 15 inches of snow in April. Are you kidding me? What?
It is unbelievable what is happening there, and it's 38 degrees and cold, but they're still playing baseball here. It's just crazy. There've been postponements left and right, and there's probably going to be massive rains tomorrow in the Boston Marathon. They're probably going to have to cancel the Red Sox game tomorrow, the annual Patriots Day game that starts at 11 a.m. Eastern time. So it's just an insane situation. Of course, Donald Trump and the Trump administration doesn't believe in climate change because none of these things happen all the time, right? It is almost May 1st. Hey, I want to read something. Go ahead.
Oh, just a shout out. Today is Jackie Robinson Day. So wear your number 42 proudly. And if you want to see a great film about it, and Herb Boyd is one of my favorite guests on your show, so it was great hearing him talk about it. Go to Netflix and watch the movie called 42. It's great.
Yep, great film.
That's just my plug for the Jackie Robinson Day. And also, I wanted to make a special announcement, if you don't mind, Jeff, and that is that the nonprofit news organization that I'm executive director for, Democracy Watch News, has just been listed by Analytica, which is no relationship with Cambridge Analytica, by the way, but Analytica, that website, has listed us as one of the top 100 digital transformation influencers in the country, which means apparently we're using technology to help transform news and political coverage. And in this case, all over the globe, because there are news branches of Democracy Watch News going on all over the world, on all different continents, and you can follow that at Twitter at DWatchNews, and then it'll give you lots of feeds from around the world, one from Europe, North America, South America, all over the world, Asia, Africa, there's some good coverage there. So it's a good news feed for just getting information about what's going on in the world. And a lot of that has to do with, our friend coordinating editor, Dean Edwards, up there in Salem, Oregon, or down there from where I'm at, who's just been doing a great job of keeping everybody informed on what's happening around the world in terms of international news, which is something that, the U.S. sorely lacks sometimes. So I just wanted to give that shout out to them as well.
Well, congratulations, Mark. You and the rest of your team there deserve it. And, it's a fantastic organization that you have put together, and we need more of it. And, we're talking with people like Alan Grayson and Robert Kraig, are out there trying to get the message where garbage that comes out of the mouth of the head of our government. I mean, that to me shows a sign of decay, to say the least. Your thoughts, my friend?
Well, this is one of the issues we've been talking about. As a journalist, I'm involved with freedom of the press issues, which is a large part of where I come down on this. Also, Democracy Watch News, our mission is to cover pro-democracy movements around the world. And, our stance editorially is basically we need a serious pro-democracy movement in the United States. And so, and that's why on our podcast, the Democracy Cast, which you can get at iTunes, we were talking about this as an editorial board that, these threats to democracy in the United States have to be taken on directly by the media and by journalists and editors all over the country. And we all have to try to bring the dialogue up a bit, because right now it's what I called in some of my latest tweets the lowbrow, right, undignified, just trashy kinds of statements that are coming from the White House. And when you have someone using words like low life and slimeball and liars, and, this is it's getting close to defamation at that point, So, I mean, we need to bring the dialogue up. We need to increase the intelligence quotient of it and bring up and be more dignified in how we discuss politics. And unfortunately, and this really happened during one of the debates, the arguments, the dialogue has been brought down so low that it's just embarrassing to me, Jeff. It's an embarrassment to the whole country.
No, it certainly is. We're talking with Mark Taylor-Canfield. We'll come back, take your calls. Of course, you can email me, jeff@revolutionboston.com. You can post on both Facebook and Twitter at Jeff Santos Show.
Johnson's Resistance Radio. Investing, activism, rebuilding America together. This is the Jeff Santos Show.
"49 minutes past the hour." The Celtics-Bucks game now in overtime. And we'll give you a score momentarily. And those of you who are baseball fans, 108-105 Boston with about 1:20 left in the first overtime. So we'll hopefully know more as we go off the air. Talking with our good friend Mark Taylor-Canfield. Of course, he lives in Seattle, which is about to get a new hockey team, and hopefully someday bring back the Supersonics, which you guys lost to Oklahoma, tragically enough. And, just some great players that came out of Seattle. What is the situation with, with Key Arena now? They're going to rebuild it for hockey, and will they presumably also play basketball there too, Mark?
I don't think there's any reason why they can't, but you never know. Whenever negotiations come up with new teams and new owners and new franchises, sometimes other things get thrown into the deal, so it'd be very difficult to predict. But yes, there are going to be renovations at the Key Arena, and for folks who are sentimental in Seattle, we're getting Ichiro Suzuki back. Yeah, so that's a big deal here. Yeah, time-honored player and a very well-loved player in Seattle. So watch out for the Ichiro bobblehead dolls. They'll be everywhere for a while now. And you know, because we've joked about that before, about how Seattle Mariners are a farm team for the New York Yankees. And I always,
unfortunately, that's the case. And I'm no Yankee fan, I can tell you that. We beat those bums from New York 2 out of 3.
Well, Ken Griffey Jr., Alex Rodriguez, Jay Buhner even. I mean, give me a break. That's one of the jokes in the Seinfeld episode about how could they trade Jay Buhner to the Mariners.
Right.
But, you know, he went the other way. So that was great.
He went the other way, exactly.
He's a local hero. I mean, people loved his buzz cut night where if you came down to the stadium and you agreed to let him shave your head, you got in for free. And all sorts of crazy things. I met him. He signed my baseball for me, and we hung out and talked about Kenny G, which was he was playing Kenny G on the stereo, which is a musician from Seattle that doesn't get many creds here because, I don't know, he's not as popular here as he is in the rest of the country. But, yeah, no, Buhner was a very fan-oriented guy, and he still is today when he does.
You know, is that, to me, also an important issue for the Democrats who are running for office to think about, that they can't just run and just be like all the other Democratic candidates, that they have to inspire, and particularly young people who want to be led in some certain direction. In a lot of cases, there are 20-somethings that are running for at least the city council and state house and so on. Maybe not yet for some Congress, but there's Connor Lamb who's in his 30s and so on and so forth. Do you feel that music has to play a key role here?
Well, it definitely did during the Seattle March for Our Lives event that the students put together. When Brandy Carlisle and Dave Matthews both performed, the high school students just went crazy. I mean, it was like the Beatles or something. They were screaming, and it was big fan response. So, I think when artists actually make heartfelt, honest, talks with their crowd, they are going to get that kind of response. Another way to deal with it is what Pearl Jam is doing, which is kind of, I think, one of the ethics that used to be part of the Occupy Wall Street movement, which was at some point people decided to get out of the streets and actually start volunteering for their community and setting up free libraries and doing, trying to help people get health care and all sorts of things, because they figured, like, if we're going to change society, then maybe we should just start directly doing it. So one of the things that Pearl Jam has done is they have 2 shows happening this August at Safeco Field, which are, sold out within probably, a half hour when the tickets went for sale. And some of these tickets are very expensive. And the reason is they're raising money for homelessness program. They have a foundation that they set up years ago that raised millions of dollars for community causes. And, if you really want to change things, I think that's a great example. And they don't necessarily, promote it and make it a big part of, advertising the band. They do it kind of because they want to do it. And the people who live in Seattle, we know it's happening, and we know what kind of guys they are. And, I've hung out with Eddie Vedder. I know what he's like. These are honest, authentic guys who just happen to become famous because they do what they love. And I know what that's like sometimes when suddenly, people are taking your picture and trying to interview you, and you're just thinking like, man, I just want to go home and rest after my tour. But, that's what happened to them. They are kind of low profile, though. They don't hang out a lot, although Eddie Vedder did play ukulele. Believe it or not, he won a Grammy Award for a ukulele folk album. But he...
Well, you're gonna have to get Eddie Vedder on the show with you one time before too long, my friend, because I'm a huge fan of his. Seen his band, and looking forward to seeing them again this summer as they play Fenway Park. So, yes, well, we're gonna have to make that happen. Mark, it's so great. Congratulations again on what your Democracy Watch news has done, and we're looking forward to having you on in a couple of weeks, and as we try to figure out this Trump world. And
man, here, Matt Rothschild from the Wisconsin Democracy. He'll support us as we track all that dark money that's splattering your screens with mud. You can count on us to tell you who really runs Wisconsin, and it's not Walker, WMC, the NRA, and Diane Hendricks. You can find all this out at our website at wisdc.org. And while you're there, please send us a donation so we can keep...
Democratic National Committee. Scott Walker went on something of a Twitter storm, very Trumpian. What do you think, Governor of the state of Wisconsin?
Wisconsinites have woken up. He talked about we need an optimistic message. How can you make people feel optimistic when you take away their health care? How can you make people optimistic when you take away the right to bargain? How can you make people feel optimistic when you're gerrymandering the heck out of districts?
Radio for the 99%.
You are listening to 1510 AM W.
Is confident the president will not fire special counsel Robert Mueller as he investigates Russian meddling in the election and any Trump campaign connections to the Kremlin. Republican Senator Susan.
I would think that it would not hurt if we passed legislation to send a message to the White House that we want the investigation to continue. But the fact is that the president is never going to sign that legislation, and there are some legitimate constitutional concerns about it.
President Trump's personal attorney, Michael Cohen, returns to court tomorrow in an effort to block investigators from reviewing materials seized in an FBI raid, plus the lawyer for Stormy Daniels.
It's the Jeff Santos Show, kicking ass for the middle class. And now, here's Jeff.
Hour 3 of the broadcast. Thank you, Keith. We are indeed in frozen tundra. No, not Green Bay, Wisconsin, and the famous Packers-Cowboys game, but it's Red Sox-Orioles where you can't even see them breathe because it's so cold outside, about 37 degrees. It's only getting colder here in Boston. The rain is held up, though, so therefore the Red Sox and Orioles are playing 2-1 Boston as they play in the bottom of the 6th inning. Well, our next guest comes to us from a much warmer climate, and he has been a real passionate Democrat, a real progressive Democrat, and people in Orlando, Florida, in that region, in the I-4 corridor, know him well. He is a former candidate for U.S. Senate. He represented the Orlando area for several terms, now running for that seat. I think it's the 9th Congressional District. He is a fighter and couldn't ask for a better song than Tom Petty's Running Down a Dream to introduce Alan Grayson back to our airwaves. Native of Florida is Mr. Petty, was Mr. Petty. And it's great to have Alan back on the program again. Alan, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. I will confess it's rather warm here in Orlando, but I can't take the credit for that. I'm very careful about that sort of thing. I know a lot of people in public life said, yes, I made it warm, I made it cold, I made it rain, I made it sunny, but I try to refrain from that.
Well, you know, I understand you're a pretty powerful guy, but I didn't think you could control the weather. But that's okay. Oh, but send us some warm weather. We could definitely use it here in the Northeast and the Midwest. Lots to talk about, Alan, and we want to get into the fact that you thankfully are running for Congress. We need to get more progressives like you and somebody who's a bold progressive and tells it like it is into the Congress. But I want to get your thoughts on the strikes. I remember you being on the program, probably 4 years ago, and how you held President Obama from getting the authority to go in to Syria, and many progressives working with Republicans, by the way. What do you think of the Friday night, Saturday morning early strikes, and are we likely to have it again? Your thoughts on the actions in the last 48 hours?
Well, I described it as the tip of the top of the iceberg of U.S. military intervention all around the world. I don't get classified information anymore, so I'll quote from Wikipedia, which says that the U.S. has more than 6,000 troops in Syria right now, and they've been there for almost 4 years. I don't remember voting on that. I'm pretty sure nobody else voted on it either, and yet there they are, 6,000 plus troops in Syria. Are we supposedly relying upon the authorization to go to war against Saddam Hussein for his non-existent weapons of mass destruction in order to justify occupying the neighboring country 15 or 20 years later? Has it come to that? In fact, we have so many troops in so many different places. It's confusing at this point. How many people knew that we had troops in Niger before 4 Americans died there a couple of months ago? And I was appalled when the president said that one of them, who came from Florida, knew what he was signing up for. I don't think anybody would go into the military expecting to die in Niger, of all places, a brutal and terrible death at that. And it just shows that we have military action going on all around the world all the time, costing us $2 billion a day, and we don't even talk about it.
Talking with Alan Grayson, you heard right there why he's such a great progressive, and we need him back in the United States Congress. So if you're listening in Orlando, make sure that happens this November. We talked to Larry Korb earlier, Center for American Progress, former Reagan defense official, and we've been talking about this issue that about 65% non-discretionary dollars goes to the military. And I asked him, I said, if a candidate like Alan Grayson, Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, et cetera, want to run and want to put all this money into health care, single payer, 4 years of free public university, all this stuff that we need to invest, the infrastructure, how much can we do? He says, look, we can take off $100 billion, get it down to from 700 to 6. I mean, if we can connect those dots, and saying, look, do we really want to continue to put our troops and other people who work for the U.S. government in harm's way, or do we want to rebuild your neighborhood, whether that's Chicago or Orlando or Los Angeles or whatever? I think that's a great way. And if the folks at the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee are listening, or the DSCC, or the DGA, here's some talking points. I don't know how you feel about that, Alan, but to me, it's there. There's money there that we can spend on Americans. It's right up Trump's alley. He talks about it. He just, is a complete BS artist. Your thoughts?
Well, my thoughts are apparent from a bill that I wrote when I was in Congress, and we had more than 100,000 troops in Afghanistan and Iraq at the time. And by the way, a good rule of thumb is that each soldier costs us $1 million a year, not for their pay, but for their support, for the so-called logistics when they're serving in a country like Iraq or Afghanistan. So 100,000 soldiers in those places means easily $100 billion a year in extra spending. And my thought was that rather than have the so-called supplemental appropriation where we vote for separate money for the war in Iraq, the war in Afghanistan, instead we would insist that the military would pay for it out of the pittance that they call their base budget, which is now over $500 billion a year, going up to $700 billion a year. And they pay for their wars out of their own budget rather than a supplemental appropriation. And I pointed out that if you did that, if you just made them pay out of their own pocket rather than supplemental appropriation, you'd have enough money to eliminate taxes on most Americans. You could zero out federal income taxes on most Americans with the money that you'd save from having the Pentagon pay for these wars out of its base budget. And I call that bill the War is Making You Poor Act. And it's still true. It's still valid. And it's a shame that no one gives a thought to the fact that every one of us, every single American from the age of 8 to the age of 80, man, woman, and child, every single one of us each year spends $2,000 to support the Pentagon.
Yeah, it's disgusting. We had on our good friend Representative Barbara Lee. I know you served with her and like her, but how many others like yourself, like her, presumably people like Bernie Sanders, DeFazio, out of Oregon, are there? And I don't know how many people voted for your piece of legislation that you just talked about, which to me is I never heard about, probably for that exact reason, is it doesn't get the mainstream media or anybody else to talk about it. I don't know how many people you got to vote for it, but that to me is it's long overdue. I mean, 50 years of the military-industrial complex having the power over presidents in Congress is just outrageous, to say the least.
Well, outrageous and tragic. In the case of the war in Iraq, we spent roughly 8% of our national net worth on the war. So all the money that had been accumulated, all the capital, if you will, accumulated over the course of 2 centuries of hard work, dispersed in the sands of Mesopotamia. That's utterly inexcusable. Whether or not there were weapons of mass destruction, and of course there weren't, the whole thing was sold to us with a lie. Even if that hadn't been the case, what enormous poor judgment is reflected in a decision like that?
No doubt. Talking with Alan Grayson here on the Jeff Santos Show. We have full phone lines, Alan, if you don't mind. I'd like to take a couple of phone calls. These are mainly supporters of yours. Let's go to Florida and talk to Peter in Plant City, Florida. You're next with Alan Grayson, Peter.
Hey, Jeff, thank you so much for bringing Alan on. This guy's like a rock star of the progressive movement. I mean, he's a very successful man, and we have not seen a Democrat since FDR to fight for the 99% like this guy does. There's no messing around. Thank you so much. And Alan, you are going to get no favors from the corporate media. They do not like you. The lobbyists, the bankers, they just really don't like you. So please do as much online as you can so we can click and paste your message all over the country. And I just want to leave it with I hope you can get on the Jeff Santos Show again. And if you recommend any Democrats for somebody like me to support that have your back, please let me know. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Alan?
Well, thank you too. I appreciate the encouragement and the support, and it's good to know that I am getting through to people in Florida like you. We have 500,000 people who have opted in to receive our emails, and that's our main means of communication. I know that a lot of people have switched to Facebook and Twitter, but we find that a lot of people simply want to get that daily or semi-weekly missive, my thoughts about what's going on in the world. And we're sending one out today about what we just discussed, this 70-minute attack on Syria, attacking 3 empty buildings and spending $500 million in the process. So thanks for the encouragement. Thanks for the support. We do our best to get through to people, and I think that it's a two-way street. I mean, a lot of our best ideas come from people who see our emails, see our Facebook posts, see what we say on Twitter, and respond. And sometimes our best bills come from that as well. I've written a lot of bills based upon a good idea that somebody else had and shared with me.
Well, Peter is a longtime listener and caller to the program, and somebody who has great ideas and has great passion, and one of your biggest supporters. Let's continue the calls and talk to John in Minneapolis, where the snow is very heavy this time of the year, I hear. John, you're next with Alan Grayson.
I'm sorry. You know what? I'm getting.
Go right ahead, John. You're next with Alan. John, go ahead.
Yeah. Hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay.
Unfortunately, we're having some of the issues with your phone again, but go ahead.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I kind of walked away from the conversation I was. So I'm, really not prepared to comment.
All right, no worries. That's all right. If you have a question, we'll go to Rudy in Chicago. But you got 10 seconds to decide, John. So go ahead.
No, that's okay. Go ahead and go to Rudy.
All right. Okay, let's go to Rudy in Chicago. You're next with Representative Alan Grayson from the great state of Florida. How you doing, Rudy?
Fine. It's good to have Mr. Grayson on your program. I heard a while ago, while he was still in office, all the good bills he was able to pass with the cooperation of some Republicans when he was still there.
Yes, that's one of the amazing things that not a lot of people are aware of how many amendments that he had. And Alan, if you could elaborate on that and some of the things that I think that, particularly on the issue of war, there are a lot of Republicans that agree with you on this issue. And as others have said, from Dennis Kucinich and others, that there is this, coalition that's developed between populists on the left and populists on the right. But you worked with the Republicans and got a lot of things accomplished in the Republican House a few years back. If you can elaborate on that.
Yeah, I passed more legislation than any other member of Congress, and that included both Democrats and Republicans. I passed 121 bills and amendments and resolutions through the Tea Party-controlled House in 4 years. And by the way, the person who held the record before me was Bernie Sanders. Bernie passed more amendments when he was in the House of Representatives by roll call vote than any other member of Congress. And the way that you do it, thank you. The way that you do it is to look for opportunities where you can get enough votes to get across the finish line. And often we did make common cause with libertarians on the Republican side. Federal Reserve, Wall Street, and so on. There was a winning formula. I moved more than $80 million from the military weapons budget to the health research budget, all with the cooperation of enough Republicans to get across the finish line.
Does leadership look down upon that on the Democratic side, you doing this, Alan?
I don't think they look down on it. I don't think they care. I mean, the only real push you get from leadership in general on either side is make sure you don't lose to the other side and raise all the money that you can for your campaign and give us as much as you possibly can in the process. Everybody on both sides has to pay, unless you're, in a race where you need all the...
Good afternoon. For Wisconsin's Resistance Radio, my name is Keith Gostad. Here are some headlines for you. This weekend's snowstorm is likely to be the biggest one recorded from northeastern Wisconsin in April. Totals in Green Bay are expected to reach over 15 inches. Meanwhile, here in Milwaukee, the combination of sleet and snow will pile up to over 5 inches. Paul Ryan has weighed in on the one is above that rule of law. Paul Ryan has also announced he will not be seeking re-election this fall. So far, the only Republican running for the 1st District is a self-described pro-white politician named Paul Nellen, who has been banned from Twitter for tweeting racist memes. Currently, the Bucks are behind 93-96 to the Celtics. There's 15 seconds left to play. It is 30 degrees and snowing in Waukesha, 33 and snowing on Brady Street, and 28 in Columbus. For Wisconsin's Resistance Radio Network, my name is Keith Gostad.
Being exploited all over the state. They're working for no benefits, no retirement. And if you don't join your brothers and sisters, you don't respect your craft.
Andy, why should I hire a union?
Crudy, you should hire a union because you want the job done right the first time. We represent the highest skilled, safety-trained workers in the industries that we represent. Glazers, painters, and drywall finishers. Join us. Painters and Allied Trades, District Council 7.
Talk.
Today, Major League Baseball celebrates the life and accomplishments of Jackie Robinson.
The Hall of Famer who broke the league's color barrier with the Brooklyn Dodgers in 1947 is honored by all big league teams every April 15th, the day Robinson took the field to play first base for the Dodgers. On this day every year, every player in the league wears Robinson's number 42, which was retired across all big league teams back in 1997 by the league, the first professional athlete ever to be given that honor. Robinson was elected to Cooperstown in 1962 2022 after a tremendous 10-year career in which he was the first ever Rookie of the Year, went to 6 straight All-Star games, and won the National League MVP award in 1949, the first African-American player ever to win. I'm John Stolness.
Costumes and other items owned by late actress Zsa Zsa Gabor have sold at auction for more than $900,000. A diamond necklace with Gabor's catchphrase "Darling" went for $20,000. I'm Ann Cates.
Listen, as a hiring manager, I've got to tell you, the best job candidate isn't always the typical candidate. Sometimes they're a grad of life.
Meet the grads of life. Young adults of unique determination and experience. An ideal fit for your company in an entry-level position, internship, or mentorship. They might not have every qualification you typically look for, but they're exactly who your company needs.
Sometimes the best candidates aren't the ones you're used to.
Go to gradsoflife.org to learn how to find, cultivate, and train this great pool of...
And now live from Somerville, Massachusetts on Assembly Row, it's the Jeff Santos Show. Kicking ass for the middle class. And now, here's Jeff.
Thank you, Keith. Hour 2 of the broadcast. We'll be talking to our good friend Herb Boyd at the bottom of the hour. For those of you who are big NBA fans and Milwaukee Buck fans and Celtics fans, the Bucks lead the Celtics 47-40 in Game 1. The best here in Somerville, and as you heard Keith in his newscast, snow up to several inches in the greater Milwaukee area. All right. Speaking of greater Milwaukee, that's where we're going to go next, because REM's favorite alum from the University of Georgia at Athens, Georgia, is on our line. He is the executive director of Wisconsin Citizen Action. According to our good friend Rudy, featured in These Times. Of course, he spells it with a K, Kraig. And he is a weekly contributor to the Jeff Santos Show, and we are very, very happy to have him with us once again. Robert, happy Sunday, sir. How are you?
I'm good under the circumstances. We had rain, and it froze. Now we have snow on top of it, so everything's ground to a standstill. So it's definitely a snow day here in Milwaukee and up and down the whole state, actually.
It is becoming a major pain for the Midwest, this April snowstorm, canceling a lot of flights, baseball games, and a lot of other events. I think the Winnipeg Jets had to turn around their plane to go to Minnesota because they couldn't get into the airport in Minneapolis. Oh, my word. Well, I guess we have to hope that Donald Trump now becomes a climate change, because he doesn't get a chance to see his favorite baseball teams play. Well, let's not. I don't think I'm going to hold out any hope for that. But anyways, Paul Ryan decided to step down as Speaker, decided not to run. This obviously is great news for Democrats. It's great news for Mr. Bryce, who's running, of course, against him, the Democratic iron worker. It just seems to me that this is great news. You're part of the progressive Democratic, folks in the great Badger State. What do you make of this? What impact will it have?
Well, it's huge. It really has. It has national implications, Jeff, and it came from national implications. What we've been saying is that the biggest thing here has to do with health care. Because Paul Ryan, his singular contribution to the Trump administration was talking the Donald briefly into believing that the best way to start off his administration was to repeal the Affordable Care Act, radically restructure Medicaid, and chase 20, 25, 30 million people off of health care and allow pre-existing condition discrimination, etc. And that was a complete disaster. With huge majorities and a president behind them, they couldn't do it. And they sparked the resistance. Healthcare was at the front of the resistance, which has resulted in this blue wave and has made healthcare the top issue in these elections, so much so that Mr. Ryan didn't want to face the voters. And in addition, he has lost any kind of influence he might have had. In other words, Ryanism has been trumped by Trumpism and Bannonism. And so it completely blew up his speakership. And not only does it have implications politically, but it has implications for health care as far as this being the time in American history to finally advance way beyond the Affordable Care Act towards universal health care, towards Medicare for all. So, and in Wisconsin, you mentioned the political implications. What's interesting is that we now have other potential candidates surfacing wanting to run for the race who were not willing to take Paul Ryan on when he was going to be on the ballot. And I certainly think that voters should take seriously Randy Bryce and his other primary opponent as well, who's a Janesville school board member, because at least they both are willing to take on Ryan rather than jump in when there's an open seat.
Talking with Robert Kraig here on the Jeff Santos Show. So do you sense that in the other congressional races, and Democrats have Mr. Pocan and a couple of others, but Ms. Moore and company, how many seats could they have come November with the departure of Ryan? How much does this, encourage other folks to run? And is it, besides Bryce potentially winning that seat, how many Democratic congressional seats can you pick up if this is, quote unquote, the blue wave?
Well, the way it sets up, and these are gerrymandered seats, you have one that was already in play. In fact, some insiders believe it was even more in play than Ryan's seat, and that's the Wisconsin 6th Congressional District, which runs from the northern suburbs of Milwaukie all the way up to Oshkosh and then in the middle of the state. A very moderate Republican named Tom Petri used to represent it, and now it's represented by a completely unbalanced Republican of the far right variety, a guy named Glenn Grossman. If you've ever seen him or just Google a video, he's unbelievable. And he's being challenged by Herb Kohl's nephew, Dan Kohl, who's a well-funded and extremely credible candidate who is very connected to the community. So that one that is made even more in play. And then the other two, the 7th and the 8th, absolutely could be, but it's still to be determined whether there's a first-tier candidate in that race on the Democratic side. But if there was, I would say there'd be up to 4. And then even though the 5th, which is Sensenbrenner's, which is the western suburbs of Milwaukee, very right-wing area, has a good candidate, I still think that candidate most likely runs a much closer race than usual, but it's hard to see an absolute win there, though it would affect the statewide outcome and Tammy Baldwin's reelection, et cetera. So I'd say it's 2 to 4 right now as far as how many congressional seats Republican held in Wisconsin are going to be on the board in November.
So, but that could be a huge thing. I mean, if this is going to be close in terms of taking over the control of the House, if you pick up, 2 seats because of Ryan's departure, then that's 2 seats that you don't have to win in a purple state like Arizona or maybe even some southern states. So that is good. And I think a lot of people, not only in Wisconsin, listening to us on AM 1510, but around the country is saying, well, this is good news overall. So let me take you to the national, because the fact is that Ryan was the architect of this tax cut. Now, Trump, takes a lot of credit for it and so forth, but it basically is his doing. Now, this, of course, not only raised the deficit, which if Ryan would have stayed, would have tried to cut Social Security in half, and same thing with Medicare. But should the Democrats who are running, particularly in the Midwest, and in districts, say, like Connor Lamb, who won, who said the tax cut's not going to do anything for my constituents, and is this something that should be taken up? Now, the DCCC, and I've seen them screw things up left and right, but the fact is, should the Democratic candidates, in your mind, considering what you have seen locally and the impact that Ryan would have nationally, should they start using him as a poster boy for what I think is the way to defeat Trump, is that he doesn't give a damn about you and me, doesn't give a damn about Joe and Jill's six-pack. And that, to me, is it fits right into that agenda, because that tax cut is exactly just a bailout for the top 1%. Your thoughts, Robert?
And there's stunned. They thought they could get away with this. They thought they could parade around saying they're helping average people, give all the permanent tax cuts virtually, and most of the benefit even at first, to the wealthiest Americans and to corporations. The biggest thing goes to corporations here, and they didn't get away with it. And, you know, Paul Ryan was the architect of this as well, though we know if Paul Ryan had his druthers, it would have included what was in all of his budgets, which was massive cuts to entitlements along the way. Remember, Paul Ryan has always claimed that he was in government to deal with the national debt, and now he's managed to deliver huge deficit spending. I mean, on a par with World War II, when there's no world war, knock on wood, going on. And so I absolutely think that Republicans have to be pegged with that and on all of their votes on health care, those two issues. And the problem Republican members of Congress and U.S. senators have is they don't have the Teflon quality of Donald Trump. In other words, maybe Donald Trump can keep, you know, doing tax cuts for the wealthy and corporations, reversing himself on TPP, which we saw this week, right, which he railed against, and still be seen as somehow a champion of the 35%, you know, the 35% stick with him no matter what. But your average congressman, like Glenn Grossman in Wisconsin, has no such Teflon whatsoever and is exceedingly vulnerable on that issue and on health care especially.
Well, let me ask you, though, I think, you know, you read up a great point about Trump on the TPP. I mean, Bernie Sanders come out and, you know, basically said, look at the lies. I think this is another issue, and you can combine the both. I mean, again, they don't care. I mean, we played the cut last week. I don't know if you still have it, Keith, of the candidate, Alec Baldwin, saying, you know, I'm all in this for a money grab. You know, I don't really care about America. And, you know, and I think that is very, very close to the truth. You know, this is typical Republicans over the last 40 years. You know, give all my friends, and I will give, you know, the legislation that benefits the people who put money in my campaign, which is the top 1-2%. And, you know, it's big corporations, big banks, military-industrial complex, the whole crowd. And, you know, and unfortunately some Democrats wanted to do the Me Too thing, and not Me Too in terms of, you know, women, but in terms of getting a share of the largesse from these big corporations. To me, this is a win-win, both of those issues.
But all the stuff Hillary did around knowledge workers and people in high tech simply communicated to the average American, you know, over 75% of whom do not have 4-year degrees, that you have nothing for me. That you don't want to expand opportunity for my family. You just want to help someone else.
Exactly, and that's a killer if you want a majority of Democrats in the House, Senate, governorships, etc. We're talking with Robert Kraig here on the Jeff Santos Show. Speaking of governorships, where are we? I know there's several candidates running for governor. Will the Ryan issue have any effect on that in Wisconsin?
It has an effect in the sense that it makes it more likely that the Wisconsin governor's race is a major target. There's still some hangover from, you know, the recalls, the workers' rights protests, and the failure to take out Walker earlier about focusing on Wisconsin. Walker still has probably too much regard among some political professionals as someone who might be hard to beat. I think he'd be very able to build a grassroots army. And so we think we're being successful in moving the whole field to the left. We and other people like Working Families Party and our Wisconsin Revolution are also working on that. But no candidate has fully distinguished themselves. I have some private views on which ones are most likely to, but that would only be speculation, and we're having an endorsement process, so I have to be a little careful. But I would tell you that there are 2 or 3 of the 9 that I think are positioned to potentially be that kind of catalytic Bernie-style candidate in a general election who could really devastate Scott Walker in the general in this election.
Okay, let's go to the phones. Bring in our good friend Mark from San Francisco. His Golden State Warriors off to a good start. Mark, you're next with Robert Kraig. How are you?
I'm well, Jeff. Just wanted to weigh in on the Wisconsin situation. You know, basically what it comes down to is if you look at Scott Walker, it's obvious that he is basically I would say, the Koch brothers' best politician or one of them. And maybe that should be the thing that they run on is, do you want your representative government or do you want the Koch brothers to run your state?
Well, that's a great line, too, Mark. You're spot on. Robert, you want to add to that?
I couldn't agree more, and we still have on the record that priceless exchange between Scott Walker and the fake Koch brother, right, where he acted like a supplicant, literally, when he thought he was talking to a Koch brother. This was during the workers' rights protest in 2011. And that should be played again. The Democrats who have run for governor since then have not taken advantage of that at all. But it's very rare that someone reveals themselves in that way. Of course, Donald Trump reveals himself daily on Twitter, but a conventional politician like Walker does not. And so you can absolutely, with the big Foxconn giveaway, up to $4 billion to a giant multinational corporation, that Walker, all he really cares about is the ruling class and the corporate class, and doesn't give a darn about the average Wisconsinite who just wants more opportunity for themselves and their children.
Mark?
I mean, they ought to use that because basically it shows where his priorities are, and also his policies also that since he's been in office are reflecting it. And they can bring this forward and basically say that most of the Republicans in the state, it's the same agenda. If you vote for them, you're voting for the Koch brothers. And Wisconsin needs to have the representative government back, and that has to be played out, I think. We need Wisconsin back blue.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more. And again, what I said, we're going to play this right now as we go to commercial, Robert. But final few seconds for you, Robert, to wrap this up.
Look, there's a huge opportunity here. Everyone knows it, but it is not natural. The blue wave has to be maintained, and it has to lead to bold progressive candidates.
Martin Luther King Jr. Drive in the Bronzeville Cultural and Entertainment District of Milwaukee.
Adopt US Kids presents Multiple Choice Parenting.
You've messed up your daughter's haircut. Do you A, get spiritual?
Mom, where's the mirror?
Beauty is within. Oh.
B, find the positives?
Less time blow drying, more time texting?
Or C, show empathy?
Mom, you really don't have to.
Twinsies!
I kinda love it. You don't have to be perfect to be a perfect parent. Thousands of teens in foster care will love you just the same.
For more information on adoption, visit adoptuskids.org. A message from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, Adopt U.S. Kids, and the Ad Council.
It's a lot easier to measure how many times students use a semicolon correctly in an essay.
Educated educators talking education.
Than it is to measure how many wonderful ideas are in that essay.
Busted pencils.
There is no teacher shortage.
With Dr. Tim Slecker.
For Wisconsin's Resistance Radio Network, my name is Keith Gostad. Here are some headlines for you. This weekend's snowstorm is likely to be the biggest one recorded for northeastern Wisconsin. Totals in Green Bay are expected to exceed 15 inches. And gusts along Lake Michigan have been recorded as high as 50 miles an hour. Meanwhile, here in Milwaukee, the combination of sleet and snow will pile up to between 3 to 5 inches. In other news, Paul Ryan has weighed in on the Mueller-Trump saga, saying, "I think he should be left to do his job." Ryan went on to say during a Meet the Press interview, "We have a rule of law system, and no one is above that rule of law system." Paul Ryan has announced he will not be seeking re-election this fall, and so far the only Republican running for the 1st District is a self-described pro-white politician named Paul Nealon, who has been banned from Twitter for tweeting.
Rebuilding America together. This is the Jeff Santos Show.
Oh, the great Marvin Gaye. Listen to this music just over and over and over again. The opportunity to play this every time we talk to our next guest. He is, of course, great reporter, columnist for the Amsterdam News, author of many, many great books, including the latest, Black Detroit, about his hometown of Detroit, Michigan, and, of course, he's a professor of political science, Black Studies at City College in Harlem, New York. Our great friend, you hear from him every couple of weeks here on the program. Mr. Herb Boyd joins us. Happy Frozen Sunday, Herb. How are you there in Harlem? I hope you get the heat up.
Oh, brother, it's on. It's on.
It's on. It is cold outside, boy.
It's cold outside. That thing is sweeping right across the Midwest and into the New England section. Particularly, here in New York, yesterday it was 74 degrees, and today is 44. So go figure.
Yeah, exactly. No, we had temperatures in the 50s yesterday, and it's now 38. So there you go. It's just too crazy. And as I was saying, everybody's playing baseball today, and in hooded. You got hoods on and parkas and all this other kind of stuff, and they're canceling the Tigers and Yankees game tonight. Yeah, exactly. Well, it is also, though, one good thing about all of this is that everyone is wearing number 42 today for Jackie Robinson Day.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
And I want to talk to you about this.
Sure.
Because, last time we were going to have you on last week to talk about MLK, but these are two amazing leaders who did so much for this country. Of course, no longer with us. But in a lot of ways, it's important that, and of course the great film done by Mr. Bozeman a couple of years ago, played Jackie Robinson. But I think it's important to sort of give a younger generation, and even those who
across the nation, that there's been at least, I noticed earlier in the day, it was at least 6 games that have been canceled. 6 opportunities for all the players to wear number 42. Of course, the Baltimore-Boston game is going on at this point, and you can see all the players out there wearing that number, signifying a particular date in history that stands almost as important as some of the other civil rights breakthroughs, because that was a barrier that Jackie ascended and tore down and opened up. There's a possibility of all these other African-American and Latin American players now that pretty much flood, particularly Latin American players who are all over the place. I was looking at the lineup at Boston, for example. There were 6 ball players on the field who had EZ at the end of their names. So
yeah.
That's a remarkable breakthrough. But consequently, though, Jeff, at the same time, we've had the diminishing or decreasing number of African American players, and there's a lot to be said about that from economic and geographic and cultural standpoint in terms of why that number has really been decreased so dramatically over the years, because so many of the players now obviously are coming out of college. You know, no longer the sandlots and going to the minor leagues. And when I was coming up, that was a process you had to work through. So if the African Americans are not going to college and are not playing college ball, that's going to diminish the numbers that will be available when the drafts go down each season. Secondly, you know, baseball is from a financial standpoint, it's a little more expensive for the African American to participate in. That means you got to have the uniform. I coached for a while. Here in the Harlem Little League, but that's disappeared. You have to have a glove, and that can be costly and expensive. Unlike basketball, you can have just one ball, and all of you can show up and have a good time.
Right.
Another thing, of course, geographically, so much of the urban, so there's no places where you can play, and secondly is that, you know, the seasons, you know, it's not a long enough season. And like in the tropics or in Latin American countries where you have an extended season where you can be outside playing ball. It doesn't happen that much here in the North, in New York, Detroit, Philadelphia, Boston, Chicago, what have you, which are places where maybe only half the year, if they're lucky, to have a season in which you would be outside playing ball. So there's a number of factors that play in to say nothing about the systemic racism.
So true. And I think the other part of this, I'm going to take a call from our good friend Wayne in a second here, is that, for so long, it has been, the White Sox have always been the number 2 team in Chicago, and obviously, as Obama proved, it was the team of African Americans. The Cubs were always the white team. You had Ernie Banks, and now it's changing a little bit. But the fact is that those are sort of the scenarios. The other thing that I think that's also interesting here is that even though Branch Rickey in the Dodgers broke the color barrier with Jackie Robinson, and then later people like Campanella and Newcomb and others, they under O'Malley really became a very white team. Until today, I think outside of Kemp, I don't think they have an African-American on that team. And that was always held up as the African-American franchise. And I think